Warning: the following stories comes from a real police officer and paramedics. What you're about to hear describes fatal incident, severe trauma, graphic injuries, and death. The details are unsettling, and some listeners may find it difficult to hear. Listener discretion is strongly advised. I'm a police officer. I worked rural North Dakota for years, the kind of place where nothing happens fast until it does. I've responded to farm accidents, overdoses, winter pileups. I've seen bodies before. That's important to say because what I'm about to describe isn't coming from someone easily shaken. This was a real call. It came in just before sunrise. A freight train versus a sedan on a county road crossing. No witnesses, no traffic. Just a long stretch of rail cutting through open land. Those are usually simple scenes. Quick confirmation, documentation, cleanup. That morning didn't follow the pattern. By the time I arrived, the train was stopped dead on the tracks, stretching farther than I could see. The air smelled like metal and dirt. Cold, quiet. No sirens yet. I started walking forward along the rail line toward the locomotive. That's when I noticed the debris. Bits of car scattered across the ballast. Shards of glass, twisted metal. And then things that didn't belong on the ground. Dark shapes, soft shapes. Flesh, pieces of it. You don't forget that texture. When I reached the front of the train, the conductor was sitting on the steps, bent over, sobbing into his hands. The engineer stood a few feet away, upright, staring straight ahead. He didn't look shaken. He looked empty. When I asked what happened, his voice was flat, controlled. He told me the car had come out of nowhere. He said it had to be doing close to 100 when it slammed head-on into the train. No braking, no hesitation. We walked together toward what was left of the vehicle. There was almost nothing recognizable. The front end was gone. The doors were gone. The inside was gone. And there was no one there. That was when we heard it. A sound, faint, broken, crying. It wasn't coming from the conductor. We followed it about 10 feet off the track, toward a thick roadside bush. Something about the way the sound cut in and out made my stomach drop. I pushed through the branches. That's where she was. A teenage girl, barely recognizable as human. Blood coated her face. Her right arm and leg were destroyed, like they'd been fed through machinery. Her jaw was torn open, hanging wrong. Every breath she took sounded wet and desperate. She was still alive. I dropped to the ground and took her uninjured hand. I told her help was coming. I told her she was going to be okay. I said it automatically. She tried to breathe. She tried to cry. But she didn't last long. She died right there, holding my hand. By the time EMS arrived, almost 30 minutes later, there was nothing left to do but secure the scene. My uniform was soaked in blood. I didn't notice until much later. What stuck with me that morning wasn't the body. It was the train crew. The conductor never stopped shaking. The engineer never said another word. He just stared, like something inside him had shut off completely. After a few years passed, about 10 years later, I ran into the conductor by chance. He was older, tired, still working the railroad. We talked briefly. Before we parted, he told me something I hadn't known. The engineer from that morning didn't make it long after the incident. He took his own life a week later. That girl was the 5th person he'd hit with a train. I still think about that sometimes. About how quiet that crossing was. About how fast that car must have been going. About how long the train needed to stop. And about how some people don't survive the impact, even when they're not the ones who get hit. I was still new to the job when this happened. Fresh EMT patch. Barely enough calls under my belt to feel confident, but enough to stay calm when the radio went off. You learn early not to panic. You learn to listen, acknowledge, and move. The dispatch came in as a vehicle collision. 2 cars, unknown injuries, school zone. Nothing about it sounded unusual. We'd run crashes before. You tell yourself it's just another call, just another scene you'll manage the same way you always do. When we arrived, the silence hit first. No shouting, no engines running, just debris scattered across the road and the smell of hot metal cooling in the morning air. One car sat sideways, crushed inward. The other had traveled farther than it should have, torn open like it hadn't known when to stop. We were told later the speed was extreme, that the car had been moving fast enough to skip across the road, that when the second vehicle pulled out, there was no time for either of them to react. 3 men had been in the speeding car without seatbelts. They were no longer inside the vehicle. I won't describe what the road had done to them. Just this: there was nothing we could help, nothing to assess. The pavement had already decided the outcome. The 4th man had been wearing his seatbelt. That was the first unsettling detail, because he was alive. The belt had done its job just enough to keep him in the car, but not enough to protect him. It had cut deep, twisted under the force of the impact, and somehow left him breathing. He was conscious when we reached him, in pain, but present. We worked him carefully, stabilized what we could, moved with a kind of quiet urgency that only happens when everyone knows time matters, but speed won't fix this. Then there was the other car, a family of 3. The mother and her daughter had taken the impact directly. There was nothing to be done for either of them. We confirmed it quickly, clinically, the way you're taught to when the answer is already clear. The father was still alive when we reached him, barely. One entire side of his body had taken the force of the collision. We loaded him fast, gave him everything we could on the way to the hospital. He didn't make it. Back at the station later, someone mentioned how lucky the man with the seatbelt was. How incredible it was that he survived it all. I didn't say anything, because what stayed with me wasn't who lived. It was how small the margin was, how speed erased entire lives in seconds, how restraint meant survival, but at a cost you don't see in safety videos, and how, on one ordinary morning in a school zone, everyone involved left changed, even the ones who never went home. I've worked emergency calls long enough to stay calm when most people can't. I've seen what medical emergencies can do to the body, and I've learned to focus on procedure instead of emotion. That's the only way to survive this job. But some calls still cut through that armor. The dispatch came in early one winter morning. An elderly woman had been found collapsed in the doorway of her home. Possible medical emergency? Nothing about it sounded unusual. These calls usually end with a quiet transport and paperwork. When we arrived, the front door was still open. Cold air poured out of the house, sharp and unmoving. She was lying exactly where she had fallen, half inside, half outside, as if she'd tried to step out and never made it. We quickly realized she'd been there all night. Her skin was ice cold. Severe hypothermia on top of whatever had caused her to collapse in the first place. Then I saw her leg. From the knee down to the ankle, there was no flesh left, just bone and darkened tissue where it shouldn't have been. 2 dogs stood nearby, silent now, watching us. For a moment, no one spoke. Training kicked in. We moved the dogs away and started working on her immediately. She was unresponsive, barely breathing. Everything about her said she was already gone, but protocol doesn't allow assumptions. As we loaded her into the ambulance and began transport, something happened that I still can't fully process. Her eyes opened, slowly, deliberately. She started to move her arms. When we spoke to her, she followed simple commands. not well, but enough to make it clear she was still alive. I remember staring at her leg, then back at her face, my brain refusing to reconcile what I was seeing. It felt wrong, like watching something that shouldn't be possible. I kept thinking of how exposed bone looks in textbooks, not in real life, especially not attached to someone who could still look at you. We rushed her into the ER and transferred care. She didn't last long after that. I don't know when the dog started eating her. I don't know how long she lay there before losing consciousness. I try not to think about whether she felt it, but every winter, when the cold settles in and doors are left open just a little too long, I think about that morning, and I remember her eyes opening.